Before we start, I want to thank our sponsor, Kyndryl, who runs and reimagines the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses. With a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability, Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find Kyndryl at kyndryl.com. And don't forget, you can find so many of the guests that have been on the Innovation Show on Kyndryl's Institute, which is kyndryl.com/institute. Rita McGrath's in there, Paul Sanjeet Chowdhury's in there, and a plethora of other brilliant guests that have been on the show. Reflecting on his innovation projects, our guest couldn't shake the notion that he was cast in a repetitive movie. The cycles were blurring, growing together into a spiral of activity, lacking clear-cut endpoints. Each project, each program even, was beginning to lack definitional meaning. Every piece of work in a company has a life cycle. A project, one specific idea or product, a program, a group of related projects, and a strategy, the long-term direction of the company. These three levels only work well when they're clearly connected. A project should never be run in isolation. It should make sense inside a program, and that program should clearly support the company's strategy. Teams that see and manage those connections tend to make far better long-term decisions, and the entrepreneurs that understand this manage the game of snakes and ladders that is corporate innovation. It is a pleasure to welcome back the Odysseus who managed to make his way through the maze, avoiding Medusa of what the corporate entity can be like. The intrapreneur himself, Chuck House, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's quite an intro.
I'm expecting you to pull up Medusa's head with all the snakes at some stage.
I can believe it. But I believe that the project is part of a program. The program is part of the strategy. The strategy itself may be to renew a corporation. A real quick example, when Jobs came back to Apple, he'd been fired because the Macintosh didn't sell all that well, a story that doesn't usually make the rounds. But his company was acquired like a dozen years later. His company then was called Next. He brought the Next operating system, put that into the Apple computer system. Well, it was more effective. They were stalled out. They sold computers, but there was no upside. They tried color boxes. They tried a lot of things. And then Jobs tried music. Then everybody said, music, you're a computer company. And he tried it, and the first one was modestly successful. Hit about 1/3 of what he predicted. People tried to get him out of it. He persisted, and the second one sold about half of what he forecast. The third one's meandered along. The fourth one blew the doors out. And before you knew it, music was half of Apple's total sales. And then he thought, well, if we could do music, how about an iPhone? And we know that story. So that's a good example of a new strategy laid into an old one, where every product works to build a program, and the program builds the strategy. So for Jobs on Apple, until the iPod Nano came along, which was like the fifth of the music things, nothing really worked, but he persevered. And I think that's the message I would give, is there's some traits we all talk about, but we don't clump them and say these traits are fundamental. One trait is curiosity. Why can't you get free music? Or why can't you get cheap music just like you get free computing with his computers, right? So he built iTunes, which changed the entire model for music around the world in terms of how artists got paid and so forth. He was ridiculed for a long time about that. That's curiosity. The second one is really perspective. You have to be able to back. I think you used a giraffe looking down at the top of a model, and he's drawing the cat because that's what he sees. Everybody else is seeing the model. How do you get multiple perspectives? How can you think about something in a way that is a novel way to think about it? Crucial. Here he's drawing the hat. And all of us are looking at the model. How do you gain more perspective? How do you make a wider perspective? How can you look at things from someone else's point of view? Those are critical elements. The third one I would put in there is resilience. And you mentioned it in the opening. You've got to be able, if you get dealt lemons, you've got to figure out lemonade is what we can do here. I wasn't allowed to do the programmable scopes. Here's this display thing, doesn't even have a channel. And we made it into a great program. I mentioned Pisces in the last session. Pisces was forced on me. And you can complain, you can do a number of things, but if you're resilient, you say, what's this new opportunity? And then the last one I'll just mention before we go to the drawings is the ability to be comfortable with data. I believe in this whole notion of big data and using data-driven decision-making. And what I find so common is that people have trouble understanding how to gather data, how to validate it, and how to use it. And so I spend a lot of time on those kinds of concepts. And we could do that with multiple ways, but I think the best way to talk about using data to your advantage would be to talk about the return maps that I think is really today's session.
Absolutely. And Chuck, what you're sharing here is so much gold. I've seen so many people fail, myself included, as an intrapreneur. And it's not because the ideas weren't right. You had the perseverance, you had the right mindset. It's just a lack of these tools and the understanding that you mentioned there, for example, resilience and perseverance and stuff like that, and curiosity. We have those in abundance, but we don't have the more left side of the brain, the more logical toolkits, the maths, the data, the understanding that actually one of the biggest challenges is that you have to navigate the corporate politics, and we're not wired that way. And before we got into the toolkit, I'd love to share, it's something I was going through over the episodes in preparation for today, and I was like, and we didn't really call out the navigating the politique of an organization.
A lot of people manage down. Their team loves them because they pay attention. Some people manage up. We sometimes call that brown nosing, or there's a lot of terms for it. You really have to do both. And if you want to take your team somewhere, it really helps if you've built them as a cohesive team. They not only understand you, they trust you. They believe in where you're trying to go. You've got a credibility that can't be challenged. So that comes to really managing downward. And that's a lot of what the idea of the entrepreneurial manager's playbook is about, how to build that trust for your team. But if you remember the entrepreneur's rules, number 7, maybe the most important, honor your bosses. The way Gifford Pinchot said it was honor your sponsors. The sponsors are one thing, but your bosses, generally speaking, aren't your sponsors. They're your enemy in many respects. And a lot of entrepreneurs misunderstand that and choose to battle with their superiors. So you can attract a bear a lot easier with honey than you can a bear trap. So my feeling is you've got to know how to, I wouldn't call it play up, but you've got to know how to work with and be able to persuade your superiors to let you do the things you've got to do. And that's a skill we don't hardly ever focus on.
Absolutely. And one last thing on it, Chuck, was you see this quite a lot is you're an entrepreneur. Another way you can get things done that nobody else inside the organization can do. You can leverage relationships, you can trade favors, and you can get people in a room that normally wouldn't get in a room together. And that's a skill of an entrepreneur. But one of the things that can happen is you haven't kept a record of all those things you've done. And then comes a meeting and your boss is like, what have you done? What have you actually achieved? And you see that time and time again. And so many entrepreneurs are lost for words in those cases. And it's easy to get rid of them because you haven't done anything. So on your bike.
So you were describing that you're busy, you're doing a lot of this work, and you're meeting with people, and you're rounding up people to help you, and all that kind of stuff. I had a new boss. I had moved to Palo Alto. I've been running corporate engineering for 5 years, and we turned that over, and I opened up HP's first software engineering division. Okay, and HP was a hardware company, not a software company, and so I'm busy, and I was a hardware guy. Here I am. I've got this new challenge to build the software tools, and I met with my new boss, who later, his name was Lou Flatt. He later became president of HP for 7 years. Later was CEO at Boeing, and had a tremendous career. We met early, and he liked what I had to say. And then we met about 6 or 8 months later, and he said, "What have you been doing? I don't see any progress." And I drew this diagram for him. And I said, this vision forming piece, what are the pressures of the changing world? We're going from hardware to software. The boundary conditions are that there are software companies in the valley, people like Oracle and even Apple. The problems we're trying to deal with are, and we need to examine that from multiple viewpoints. This is the multiple perspective thing, right? So I said, I did all of that, and that's what I've been doing the last 6 months. And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah. And what I'm in process of doing, it is going to take us another 6 months as we're trying to form conclusions, do some prototyping on small audiences, right? That's the vision testing and strategy forming thing. That'll take us another 6 months. And then, and only then, will you see anything." And he just sagged back in his chair and says, "Oh my God," he said, "this is a lot harder problem than I thought." He said, "Well, that's why you got me to run it." And then he said, "What happens after that?" And I filled it, you widen the test, you get some people to really assess it, then you validate it. And now for the first time, and this is probably 18 months in, depending on how these things go, but if it's a big problem, it takes a while. Finally, you're ready to begin to build your first thing. He said, "Oh my God, I had no idea it takes that kind." And then I said, and then each of these phases is like a 3-year phase. So this cycle is a decade-long cycle, and you're expecting me to grab the whole thing in 6 months and be done. He said, "You've got to write that down, and you've got to show that." And essentially that diagram and the need to show him that and get his understanding was the first time that I'd really worked with top management at HP about why this stuff happens this way, as opposed to how it happens.
Your point there about the length of the project. Remember you were talking about the I know, you don't know, so the known unknowns, all that stuff, the tacit knowledge. That this, and we have to look in the mirror here with ourselves as intrapreneurs. We know that, but they don't know that because they run everything that's already established, and all they're doing is optimizing it. And you're coming up with the breakthrough idea, and you know it needs to go through this to do it right. But they don't know that because they've never done it, and they may have seen a keynote, but they have never actually done it. And it's just a totally different way of seeing the world. Exactly to your point about the giraffe, they're seeing one thing and you're seeing a different thing. And that lack of communication is often a breakdown. And that's where I think the tools are so beneficial.
So I'll just give you a quick segue here. He wanted some examples. And I said, and this was when the hell was it? 1987 or so, 88. And I said, let me give you one for HP. HP has been in the instrument business forever. And we built oscilloscopes, we built voltmeters, oscillators, spectrum analyzers, all the things that electrical engineers know about. I said, and then one day we decided to be at medical products. And I said, who decided that? There wasn't a guy building voltmeters. Someone had the idea that maybe we could go in this other field and bring our talents to bear. And I said, as a matter of fact, Lou, you ran the medical group. Where did you get the idea to do it? He said, that had already been decided. I don't know who decided it. My job was just to build more of them. And I said, that's the question. So the same question was Jobs. Who decided that music would save Apple computer or the phone? These were, at the time, they were ridiculed by all the outside pundits. How could a computer company decide music is where the future is? Huh? That 450 million iPods later, they've done a pretty nice job. So your point that people that haven't been down that path don't understand it is partly because no one ever explained to them what it takes. And so, kind of an indirect way, that's why I wrote this book, was to try and outline the processes by which these things happen. Now, I wasn't trying to extol what I did. I'm proud of what I did. I think we built some important things. They changed the world in some small ways. But that isn't the crux of the book. The book is how this works as opposed to what I did.
Absolutely. And that comes true loud and clear, Chuck, by the way. Just for me reading it with that lens, I totally got that. But you've sent me down a different pathway here. People are going, I thought you guys were going to give us the toolkits. We were going to do that in episode 1. We're on episode 4. Bear with us. But there was a piece here. You wrote that various Palo Alto folk would show up often at a divisional review. So this is how it works with projects. They'd busily convert the static numbers on R&D project sheets into dynamic or internal rate of return and prod the hapless project manager about whether his or her project was worth continuing. Here is the line that never goes away. And this line, I was like, oh my God, we've seen this movie before. Such tactics took a heavy toll on riskier projects, such as our Logic projects, where marketing folk had no clue about the potential sales rate. Headquarters interference of this type drove me, this is you at the time, drove me nuts. It is one thing to lambaste extant procedures, but quite another to suggest meaningful change. And it reminded me of the old quote by Buckminster Fuller, there's nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. Because they kill these ideas when they're just on the verge of becoming something new. So with that, I just wanted to share that quote because I thought it was key. And then that's why you wrote the book. That's why you gave us these tools. It's like going, I don't want this to happen to you. This is how I got around it.
The tools they were using to assess it are 3. What's the cost of the project? How soon is it going to be done? And what will it sell? Or what profit will it return is the underlying point there. So when they came out for a project review, the hapless engineer I mentioned hasn't got a clue how it's going to sell. His or her job is to simply build the product, get the features right, and get them done to a schedule. That's it. And so they had a metric, we called it the Brunergram, that allowed them to see the progress rate. These are basically along x-axis. You do the initial phase, the development phase, the production prototype phase, and then release to production. That's what IDPR mean across the bottom. So that's a time axis that you would show the dots, and then you would say it's going to cost me, in this case, $300,000 to get to the investigation phase finished. For $1 million, I will get the development phase finished. For $2 million, I'll get it to production prototype or production release. And at $2.5 million, it's ready for sales release. That's what these dots. So you draw this, you'd put the dots in, and then you'd go downstream, and then you're 6 months downstream, and you say, we draw that first little box. We met the cost target, we met the schedule target. Then you slipped a month down here on the development phase, so you bump that out a little bit. Cost a little more to do that, so that all bumps it up. But you've got this little trajectory here of your progress. And this one on the left, you can see that we only lost 1 month on schedule the whole time. And we only went over budget maybe 20%, or not 20%. We went over by $200,000 on $2.5 million. We went over by 8%. So we're 8% long on schedule. We're 8% long on expense. Not bad. The one on the right, on the other hand, things started slipping right off the bat. We couldn't even get the investment phase done. Cost us twice as much to get it done and almost twice as long. Okay. Then we predicted then what it's going to be for these others. So you put in these new dots, and then it took more than twice as long to get the development product done. And again, twice as much money. So you look at the one on the right and you said, this team isn't performing as well as the other team. Well, the point of my discussion is these were the tools we had. They were very effective. You could put this up for 5 projects. Then you could tell at a glance how the 5 are doing. You could say, Group A, hey, we're going to give you stock options this year. Group B, we're going to ding you. Group C, clearly you need somebody as a new leader, and so forth. But it's an engineering perspective, not a corporate perspective. It's not a strategic look. It's a time and feature cost look. And the graph had been done by the previous corporate engineering director 15 years before, and it was used all over HP. Actually, there's nothing as good as that, generally speaking, today in the field. A number of consultants at the time picked it up and touted how great it was. And my feeling was, it's terrible. It shows those elements very well, but that's not the crux of what you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to get a finished product that sells, that makes money. And so what you want is a graph that can illustrate that. And that led me to what I call the return map.
The point about the Brunnergram is it is great, but from one perspective of the giraffe again, you're only seeing one angle of what's going on.
Think about how HP are structured. First of all, it's an engineering company. Whether people were in manufacturing or quality or legal or human resources, everybody had an engineering degree. We would not hire a personnel director who didn't have an engineering degree. We believe so much in engineering. So it was natural that we're taking the engineering perspective.
I found it really interesting, your curiosity, how much you wanted to solve the problem. You write that you became obsessed with finding a way to measure and to scope. And you went back over historical data. So you averaged forecasts across 12 real R&D scope projects. And it wasn't pretty, you found out. Schedules slipped by about 80% of the time. Costs overshot roughly 65% of the time. And then you went back even further into these 20 historic scope projects, and you looked at the original sales ramp assumptions, compared them to what actually happened 12 months after launch, and only 3 landed within 30% of the forecast. 2 beat expectations by about 50%. 4 never sold a single unit, and the rest sat somewhere between 15 and 70% of plan. That gap between what we think will happen and does happen still plagues not only intrapreneurs, but VCs today. I mean, that whole idea of spray and pray or 1,000 flowers bloom, that's why I think these tools and the knowledge of these tools are so helpful to entrepreneurs, because it just gives you a better margin for error. It's like, Chuck, when I started off playing rugby, we were doing weights, but there was no real science behind it. So we ended up getting injured quite a lot. And actually got injured by doing the right thing, which is even more punishing, because we were trying to work well towards something and you end up injuring yourself, and you would have been better off doing nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I love about these. Do you want to just say a word maybe on the deep research you did and what you uncovered from this research?
Nobody had ever done postmortems, but we had all the data. And I never threw the damn data away. So I just thought, you could mine this data and find out. And I'll tell a quick story along that line. I became a newspaper boy when I was like 11 or 12. And one of the things is we were supposed to try and get subscriptions by going door to door and saying that we had a potential trip to Catalina if we could get 4 new subscriptions tonight. And 99 out of 100 doors would say something to the effect of beat it. Some were more profane than others, but basically you got rejected everywhere. And I thought, I don't like rejection all that well. And so I wound up building a database of houses that were for sale and when they sold. And the only places I would ever call was on the place a week after they moved in. I wound up making 1/20th the number of calls and 3 times the kill rate. And so early I learned the value of data collection and data files. And so I just used that and went back and said, how well have we been doing? And the answer is, these are wild guesses, and they never came very true. And so there's no more reason to think the next one will be any better than the last one. And my goal was to say, can't we put more assessment into this? How did we get such dumb answers before? Can't we do a more? So the idea was, instead of just swagging what sales will be, let's have 5 trip reports that give us at least some credence on this thing. So that's what led to those kind of investigations. I'd forgotten I'd put those numbers in, but yeah.
And the credibility it gives you then with a more left brain manager, that's the benefit of it, is when you have no numbers, some numbers based on at least it's historic is beneficial, because at least it gets them. You said about managing up, you're managing up then. And yes, it's a pain to do it. It's an absolute pain to do those things. But I find it really interesting. I'm a huge believer in, say, when I do a workshop or work with a team, I try and get them to get their findings on a wall where other people in the organization will see it. So somebody might stumble across and go, I know a use for that idea or whatever, to inspire people across the organization. But when you posted your graphs on the office wall, designers became more interested in the results of their work in the marketplace. And I thought about how, remember before you said one of your colleagues designed a great competition among salespeople to win the belt. Remember the belt idea? But you started to instigate some competition between the R&D guys because they wanted to see how well their projects were doing in the field.
So have you got the maple tree thing?
I do indeed, yeah. Let me open.
That was the eye-opener for me. And the fact that it didn't happen at Hewlett-Packard, but happened in a little retail store is what's amazing. So we had this, I had a little plant nursery on the side. My wife and I and another couple ran this thing. And we hired the Colorado College hockey team off season to plant and manage our nursery, plant the trees and shrubs, move them around the lot. They were our brawn, and they didn't know a tree from a toboggan. Anyway, we were trying to get them to understand what they were doing, and I used this chart because VisiCalc hadn't yet happened, but this would have been a perfect VisiCalc kind of chart or Excel spreadsheet. So the tree itself cost a fair amount. We bought these trees from a wholesaler, and then we had shipping costs on them. We had to put soil in them, and then we had to buy a container to put them in. So the material costs are all this first column on the left. Second is the labor of potting them up, and then of watering and taking care of them is what these guys were doing. So their costs are in this column. And then the third is, my daughter was an advertising student. She would place a story in the local newspaper, and then they would charge depending on where it went. So the cost of advertising. So we would show this chart to these hockey players, and I might as well have been talking Swahili. Their interest in this was zero. It didn't mean a thing to them. And so I drew it a different one. Okay, so here's break-even time for maple trees. So the idea here is week 1, we spent, so it looks like a couple $100. These were dollars. A couple $100 bought us 10 trees. So these were $20 a tree coming off the trucks, okay? And then we had the cost of getting those things potted and ready. And so the first line, which goes mostly horizontal at about 200 up there, is the cost of the trees. And because we're watering throughout, it keeps building a little bit. And this is a logarithmic plot for a simple reason. And then after 5 or 6 weeks, the trees have rooted in and they're able to be sold. You can't sell them while they're still loose because they'll go bare root when you go to plant them, and that actually kills them. So you have to wait 5 or 6 weeks for them to be ready to sell. Then we sell them. The first one you sell for $200, okay? And so you practically make all your money back on the first tree in terms of revenue. You only make about 40% because now you've got the selling costs, which I didn't have on that chart. So the difference between the upper line here that's dotted and the lower line that is dashed is the difference between the revenue you take in and the profit you get to keep. Okay. And what I defined was that the break-even time is where the profit line crosses the original cost line. Okay. So very simple graph. And you don't need to worry about where the shipping costs are. They're bundled in. You don't need all the detail of the previous slide that no hockey player cared about. But you do have a number here. You have a bet metric, in this case, at about 8.5 weeks. Okay. And I never thought about this, but these guys are the most competitive. This is, in America, ice hockey is a very competitive Division I NCAA sport, but it's at small colleges because that's the only places that have ice rinks and people that like to skate. And so the point is, these are competitive guys. Okay. So what happens, we publish these things and we had them for oak trees and maple trees and whatnot. And the guy who planted all the oak trees says, I can sell mine quicker than you can sell yours. They started competing on when their damn trees are going to be sold, which meant they had to learn what the tree does and they had to talk to customers walking on the. And instead of them being out there with a hose just standing there while the customers are milling around, they're, hey, have you taken a look at oak trees? Let me tell you about oaks. What they do is, it was so funny. The point of that is some years later, I'm in this meeting at Hewlett Packard, and these people are arguing about what's the best metric. Is the Brenner-Graham better, or should we have improved sales forecasts, or what should we do? And I said, have you thought about having one slide that captures everything about sales, about marketing, about quality, about engineering, and put it all in one slide and look for break-even time, which is math? They said, you bet. We wrote it up. We had this meeting on a Friday in Santa Rosa group division. We had 7 divisions that had this group meeting. And my co-author for the HP book later and I were hosting the meeting. And they came up with 46 metrics that would be important to measure their products by. And I said, you can't keep track of 40. It's like my daughter had the fur coats. They were measuring 32 things at their dress shop. She said, if you're interested in profit, why don't we sell the big ticket items? Didn't you have a guy that he went out and his salesman told him, I never show the cheap ass product because it takes me 3 times as long to make the same money.
Sounds like your daughter didn't lick that off the stones.
So anyway, the point was we had these 46 metrics, and I said, let me show you something I used with my hockey player. They went nuts. We drove home on Friday night. Santa Rosa is about 120 miles from the Bay Area. We get home like 9 at night. And Sunday morning in Monterey, we were supposed to have a meeting of the entire HV senior council. Okay, so this is the 20 people running the company. And on the way home, I said to this guy, if we could write this up as a paper and I could present it Sunday, he said, we only have 24 hours. What can we do? We finished the paper at 3 a.m. And we both wrote versions, and he finally wrote the final copy. He put it under the windshield of my car in my driveway at 3 a.m. I grabbed it and made copies at 6, drove to Monterey and presented it at 9. And the president of HP, John Young, took it to Harvard Business Review. First, he got it in Fortune magazine as the best metric that HP has ever done. And then we later got it in Harvard Business Review. It's been republished in 20 or 30 books. And it's never once been iterated, which is astonishing to me. And what I'm busy at the moment, we have just put together a white paper, and we're putting together a video series about how you actually would use this. And I'm doing this 35 years after I did it for Harvard Business Review, which is nuts. It should have been out there. but I was busy doing other things.
Chuck, did you get the credit for the HR article?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
got
good.
the-
Okay.
And
was
it's been printed a
what was
lot. That's got its own story. And I could maybe show that when we're done.
My interpretation, and I'm going to show the map now in a second, the return map is, and I wanted our audience to understand this and also to check that I have it right, that I'm seeing the giraffe right. So it's a shared picture of what a project is expected to give back. That's
Right.
what return means to the company over a period of time, and how confident everybody is about that. And importantly, it's not just financially, because oftentimes it's not financial return. It could be like this return map itself is a product that gave back because it helped the reputation of HP, etc. But it also covers things like revenue and profit expectations, costs and investment over time, risks and assumptions, operational impact. That's an important one. Manufacturing quality delivery. So the impact it has on operations, and market uptake and customer behavior. So this could be, again, a halo effect for the organization. And crucially, the thing I took most from it is it's not a one-off business case. It's a living map that evolves as reality unfolds, as you get.
That's the secret that never got in the books. The fact that it's a living document.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's take a look at it. So I've already outlined with the one we showed for the nursery, the idea. Let me make a couple key points here, though. The first is that the y-axis is a logarithmic axis, not a linear. So we're going up by powers of 10, 1, 10, 100, 1,000. The logarithmic understanding is pretty low in most circles. We teach it in engineering school. We especially teach it in biology and places like that. It's almost never taught in the business schools. I've had as many as 2 people in an audience of 100 at a business school raise their hands to say they'd heard about logarithmic plotting. Microsoft, in a 1,000-page professor's document they used for Excel, mentions it for one paragraph, doesn't show you the tab that gets it, doesn't show you an example to use it. And Einstein called that the 8th power of the world. I said there's 7 wonders of the world, and logarithmic plotting is the 8th wonder of the world. It's an incredibly powerful thing. The reason you have to use it is if you look at this here, these are thousands of dollars. So here's 100,000, here's $1 million. In this particular example, we never get above $200,000 investment, but we get sales of 50 million. You can't plot 200,000 versus 50 million and see anything on a linear plot. So you have to do it on a logarithmic plot to be able to distinguish it. So that's the first thing, is the ordinate. The second thing is these estimates, and these are all estimates. These are estimates made by each department. So the engineering department is responsible for this blue line of the investment, primarily. Okay? The red line is the responsibility of the sales and marketing team. The profitability line is the responsibility of the team to assess the manufacturing costs, the quality assurance, the feedback costs, all of the, if you will, subordinate costs that go into a product. So the point is, everybody in the room has an input for their line. And you can challenge them. And so you could have the Brunograms underneath the investigation curve. You can have all sorts of marketing estimates. You can have manufacturing estimates. You can have quality estimates. Each of those are subordinate to these graphs. But the point is, everybody in the room, all departments, have a say in how this diagram gets built. Okay? Now, having a say in it and then drawing the line essentially assigns responsibility. Right? So let's move forward to the next slide, and which is that living document slide. And here we are. We've gone down phase, and what we find is, we slipped development here. Instead of coming out month 16, we're going to come out month 23. So we just lost 7 months of development time. So that's on R&D. R&D slipped their schedule by 7 months. It didn't cost any more. We didn't spend any more money until later. The reason it's later is because we had to keep the team in place. But on a long scale, that was a small cost. Okay. What that does though for sales is sales now moves out, and now you've got new competitors in the space, and the windows are smaller. And so the new sales team says, I'm not going to forecast 50 million. I'm going to forecast maybe 8 million. What? You're going to cut it from 50 million to 8 million because I slipped a few months, And so then you have this debate between the two teams. Then the guy running manufacturing says, yeah, and you're not selling as many, so I can't get the same manufacturing cost. Manufacturing cost goes up soon as sales come down. And so he says, instead of losing 7 months on development, we're going to lose 19 months. And you go, huh? So you can imagine this could generate what I would call team dissatisfaction. But the point is, you have the unit acting as a team. They're all responsible for their part of it. And as you said, and you can also look at it and offer suggestions to the other team. So for example, the sales team might say, I could probably get back close to that 50 million if you could give me one new feature that the competition has that we didn't know about. And so if you do that, it might cost you another month or two, but that would get that ramp back up. So you have this iterative thing between several departments around one graph. And without this forcing function, you don't have a way to bring that whole team together. So this is the secret of Hewlett's. Hewlett would organize things around divisions. And a division was 500 people. And he said that way, he says, the marketing people have to eat lunch with the engineering people. And they become friends and allies. I believe in the teamness of that, as well as the intrinsic value of seeing those graphs.
Have you ever heard of the jigsaw classroom concept? It was after segregation was lifted in the States between African-American children and American white children. And this guy, Elliot Aronson, I had him on the show, brilliant man. He brought in this concept called the jigsaw classroom. And essentially it was they wouldn't teach the same lesson to everybody. They'd get them to learn different segments of the lesson. So hence the jigsaw. So they would work together rather than competing for the attention of the teacher. So say there was a weaker member on the team, just like you with sales and marketing, that they would help each other. And they go, okay, how do I help you get better? Because I need you to do well, so we all do well as a result. That kind of mindset. And then, did you ever hear about this? Was a famous article in The Economist. It was called the green Volvo effect.
No, I don't think so.
Have you ever heard of that? You'll love this one. So Volvo had this specific color, green Volvo, and they couldn't get rid of it, right? So sales and marketing plan, they go, okay, let's make a plan. Let's get rid of this thing. So marketing put on a great marketing show. Sales do their piece. They clear them off the lot. But nobody told manufacturing. And manufacturing went, these things are selling like hotcakes. Let's make some more.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. It's the exact opposite of it's what you're solving for there, but also the camaraderie and helping each other getting through it. But also back to the giraffe. You're seeing everything the way it should be, and everybody's sharing it. And you're also learning the challenges of the other parts of the department. I think people miss that. People don't know how difficult it is to sell something you're not really au fait with, or how to market it when you don't really understand it. And in the engineer's head, they can see it as clear as day. So getting them all in the same room like that is brilliant.
I talked about the teamness that it builds. What I didn't talk about was the iteration effect. As you're doing the second project and you come in to make the new return map for it, people are more diligent about how to build their part of the curve. And so we wound up not only building more team camaraderie and team understanding, we also wound up building a more accurate forecast, which helped everybody. It's just, you can order the right number of parts, you can build the production line the right size, you can get the right amount of marketing documentation out there, etc. So it really had a twofold positive impact.
I'm laughing to myself because me and Chuck, before we came on, we were like going, we'll do maybe 30 minutes. We're nearly an hour in, Chuck.
You said you have some watchers saying, when are you going to get to the tools? I hope they're a little more satisfied now.
The last one then is strategic cycles. I love this, and I think this one is so key. I'm a metaphorical thinker, and I thought about this where when my kids were younger, they watched this show called Octonauts. It's a show about these underwater animals who are explorers, and they stumble across different animals, and they're all real animals, but they stumble across this turtle, the sea turtle, and the sea turtle goes from the north, from the cold water right down to Australia. And the way it navigates it is it slips into a stream. So there's these Gulf Straits. And when you get into the stream, you just fly down. It's going down a tunnel and a water slide. Yeah. And I remember when I saw it, I often thought that's what's missing sometimes when you build a product or a project that isn't in line with the company's strategy. And the strategy is the water strait. And if you do, it will fast track it. But if you build it outside that zone, it's going to go really bad. And I love what you say here. Strategic cycles are a set of consecutive initiatives aimed at a specific market segment or opportunity. Apple's decision in 2001 to enter the digital music arena with iPods and then iTunes is a great example that Chuck shared. The music entree was a significant new thrust for Apple, which for 25 years was strictly a personal computer manufacturer. And then you also share beachhead products. These are truly new ventures, and they usually define the first round, followed by major refinement of a thesis, which concludes with a suite of fully tuned offerings in the third phase. And you say here, the trap for most companies is when they embark on ambitious strategic cycles, is that a given phase becomes all-consuming. And you recall here the classic adage, our job was to drain the swamp, but we're busy here with all these damn alligators.
So this is a fairly simple diagram, actually. The key point to me is that so if you draw vertical lines on this, the second phase investment starts roughly using roughly the same resources you had been doing for investing in the first one. That starts before you have any idea where the phase one sales ramp is going to hit. So you're really starting the phase two investment without any solid knowledge of the phase one sales rate. So you're making a bet that the phase one sales are going to be worthwhile. They may not be quite what you estimated, but they're worth the investing in second phase because they're going to be good enough. Okay. And the same is true for the third phase. So the point is you're always forward investing without knowing the full outcome of the previous investment. Okay. So let's put numbers on this. If you imagine the first investment for the iPod was on the order of about $3 million, and sales went to phase one sales reached about 1/3 of prediction. Okay, we didn't know that until we're halfway into the second investment. And so people were urging Jobs to drop it. Hey man, you missed the thing by 3-1. They sold like 75,000 units in the first 90 days. And then it took another almost a year to sell another 75,000 units. It was just, but he's getting urged to drop this investment because we need it over on computers. And he said, no, he kept going. And he hit this phase. He hit about twice what the sales had been on the first one, but only about half of what he estimated on that one. So he's in the middle of the third phase, and people are still saying, what are you thinking? You're squandering basically our birthright, which is computing. And that's when he came up with the iTunes idea. And the iTunes idea was that you could really sell every song for $1. And And what that did was change the world against Napster, which was offering free downloads, even though they were illegal. And so what he co-opted with the iTunes wasn't the fact that he could get $1 per, it was that the music industry would now endorse him. Okay? And it's kind of like that Gulf Stream for the turtle. Once you have the music makers behind you, you got a clear path, right? Sales quadrupled instantly. And the rest is history. Same with the iPhone. The iPhone did not have internet connectivity on the first one or the second one, but on the third one it did. And the Palm Pre came out with probably the best phone ever built, and had better features by far than the iPhone. Built by the same team, by the way, who resigned from Apple because they were pissed that Jobs took the credit. They didn't get it. That story isn't out there too strongly. John Rubinstein is the source of my input there. Anyway, the point is they bring it out just as Jobs gets the connection to the internet with wireless. And killed him. Now he didn't have a phone. Now he had an information portal. Way different. Way different. So my point is, if you think about it in terms of these triads, it gives you a structural way to describe it to your bosses who are questioning, why are you making this investment now? Because in the scheme of things, I need that full sequence to make the strategic cycle.
Brilliant, Chuck. And I have asked Chuck behind the scenes, I don't think I said this before, but Chuck is going to kindly come back on the show with Steve Sasson, who was the gentleman who created the Kodak digital camera inside Kodak as a 23-year-old. And he met huge resistance. So I thought these two gents would be able to share war stories, scars, scar tissue, arrows in the back, Chuck, as well. Chuck, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. I think we did great credit to this book, and I highly recommend reading it. It's worth the read as well. The personal stories bring it to life. Chuck has lots of challenges he got through there as well, amazing challenges to get through anyway in life, as well as doing all this entrepreneurial pursuits as well. And Chuck, it's been a huge pleasure speaking to you. I learned loads, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch and supporting your work in any way I can.
It has been a pleasure to have this time. I've never had anyone dig into the book as deeply as you have, and I'm profoundly impressed.
It's an absolute pleasure. As I said, the Odysseus of entrepreneurship, author of Permission Denied, Odyssey of an Intrapreneur, Charles House. Thank you for joining us.
You bet. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks as always to our sponsor, Kyndryl, who runs and reimagines the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses with a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability. Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find our friends at Kyndryl at KYNDRYL, Kyndryl.com.